Today we're going to look at Ardra Nakshatra. Ardra occupies the middle degrees of Gemini and is the sixth nakshatra in the Vedic zodiac. Its name means wet or moist, and that single word captures something essential about this nakshatra's character. It is associated with water, with tears, and the dampness that follows a storm. Ardra is one of the more challenging nakshatras to discuss because its themes are not comfortable ones. It is associated with loss, grief, destruction, and dissolution. But the classical texts are careful to provide a redemptive framing alongside these difficult qualities, and that framing is important. Ardra has two core themes: loss, grief, and emotional intensity, and destruction and dissolution as necessary transformation. Both flow directly from its symbol and its presiding deity. Ardra's symbol is a teardrop. That image alone establishes the emotional register of this nakshatra: loss, disappointment, grief, and the overwhelming feelings that accompany them. The teardrop is also associated with wetness and moisture, and more broadly, with vapors, liquids, and their movement and flow. Ardra governs anything connected to dampness and the movement of water. The presiding deity is Rudra, the storm god, whose name is etymologically connected to both weeping and to the roaring and howling of storms. Rudra controls destruction and dissolution. He is the force that tears things apart, that brings loss and calamity, that strips away what exists. But here is what the classical texts are careful to point out: Rudra is Shiva in another form, and Shiva is not simply a destroyer. He is the remover of what has outlived its usefulness. He destroys so that something new can take the place of what has ceased to serve. The storm that tears through a landscape also clears it. The tears that fall are moisture, and moisture is what makes new growth possible. That redemptive dimension is built into the deity himself, and it is the key to understanding Ardra's deeper purpose. The classical texts also associate Ardra with a range of shadow qualities like lack of gratitude, malice, treachery, deception in business and finance, cruelty, and self centeredness. These are worth naming honestly. They represent what Arthur's intensity produces when it is misdirected, when the storm destroys without the wisdom of Shiva guiding it. The two themes worth understanding in Ardra are as follows. The first is loss, grief, and emotional intensity. When the ascendant or moon falls in Ardra, the native may have strong feelings that can be overwhelming. Planets positioned in Ardra and the matters indicated by the houses they rule tend to become sources of sorrow and disappointment. This is not a gentle nakshatra emotionally. It feels things deeply and is not easily shielded from pain. The second theme is destruction and dissolution as necessary transformation. Rudra removes what has outlived its usefulness, and this can manifest in many ways. Those who work with primal destructive energies fall under this nakshatra, like atomic researchers, chemotherapists, those who destroy viruses and bacteria in service of healing. The destruction is real, but it is in service of something: the clearing of what no longer serves, so that something new can emerge. The classical texts offer a direct and honest encouragement to those whose Ardra is prominent in their charts. Those who endure the trials of Ardra gain what the text calls the pride and satisfaction of conscious worth, a knowledge of how much it costs to accomplish one's growth. That is not a small thing. It is the specific wisdom that only laws can teach. When the ascendant falls in Ardra, both themes, that of loss and transformative destruction, tend to be visible across the arc of the person's life. The three examples here illustrate this across very different domains. Albert Einstein had Ardra rising, and he is one of the most instructive examples of this nakshatra's full range. The classical texts specifically mention atomic researchers under Ardra's domain, and Einstein's theoretical work laid the foundation for the development of nuclear weapons, the most destructive force humanity has ever produced. He did not build the bomb, but he opened the door through which it walked. That connection to primal destructive energy is unmistakably Ardra. But Einstein also embodies Theme 1 with equal force. When he understood what his work had contributed to, when the bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, he was devastated. He spent the remainder of his life in grief and in active opposition to nuclear weapons, dedicating himself to peace advocacy. The teardrop followed the storm. The man who unlocked the atom's destructive power became one of its most anguished opponents. That arc from primal destructive discovery to profound grief and attempted redemption is one of the most complete Ardra stories in modern history. The Dalai Lama has Ardra rising, and he represents the loss and grief theme in perhaps its most sustained and publicly visible form. In 1959, at the age of 23, he fled Tibet as Chinese forces moved to suppress the Tibetan uprising. He has lived in exile ever since, more than 6 decades, having lost his homeland, his people's freedom, and the ability to return to the place that defines his identity and his mission. That is an extraordinary weight of loss to carry for an entire lifetime. And yet, what the Dalai Lama has done with that grief is the redemptive dimension of Ardra at its highest expression. He has channeled loss into a global message of compassion, forgiveness, and the possibility of inner peace even in the face of injustice. His tears, in the Ardra sense, have become moisture for a different kind of growth. He did not overcome his grief. He went through it and brought back from it something that has touched millions of people around the world. Steven Spielberg has Ardra rising as well, and he has spent his career doing something very specific, giving form to historical grief and loss so that it can be witnessed and understood. Schindler's List, Saving Private Ryan, Empire of the Sun, Munich. These are not entertainment in the conventional sense. They are sustained encounters with atrocity, with the worst that human beings do to each other, and with the question of what survives destruction. That is Ardra's territory, the storm and what remains after it. Spielberg also lost his parents to divorce as a child, an experience he has described as the defining wound of his life and the source of the recurring theme of broken and reconstituted families that runs through almost all his work. Personal loss became the root of his artistic vision. The moon in Ardra shapes the inner emotional life. Franklin Roosevelt had his moon in Ardra, and his life story is one of the most direct illustrations of Ardra's redemptive arc in political history. In 1921, at the age of 39, polio struck him and took away the use of his legs. For a man of his background, ambition, and physical vitality, that loss was devastating. It could easily have ended his public life entirely. Instead, it transformed him. Those who knew Roosevelt before and after polio consistently described the illness as the crucible that made him the leader he became. It gave him an empathy for suffering that he had not previously possessed, and a resilience that no subsequent difficulty could shake. He then applied that same transformative principle at the scale of a nation. When he took office in 1933, the American economy was in ruins. His New Deal deliberately dismantled what had broken and could not be repaired, clearing the ground for new structures to take their place. And when the Second World War came, he led the effort to destroy the forces that threatened to consume the world. Personal loss became political wisdom. Political wisdom became transformative leadership. That progression is Arthur's arc expressed through one of the most consequential lives of the 20th century. The second example is that of Auguste Rodin, who had his moon in Ardra, and he connects to the destruction theme in the most literal artistic sense possible. Rodin described sculpture not as the art of adding, but of taking away, of removing everything that was not the figure hidden within the stone or bronze. His most famous works are unfinished by conventional standards, figures emerging from rough, unworked materials as if the destruction of the surrounding mass is itself part of the art. That method, revealing through removal, creating through destruction, is Rudra's principle expressed through the hands of an artist. Rodin also endured significant personal loss, most notably the death of his sister Marie, which sent him into a profound depression from which he emerged as the sculptor he became. The grief was the making of him. Finally, Padre Pio had his moon in Ardra, and he represents the suffering and spiritual transformation theme in its most extreme form. From 1918 until his death in 1968, he bore the stigmata, the physical wounds corresponding to those of Christ's crucifixion. He was in chronic pain for his entire adult life. He also endured decades of investigation, restriction, and effective persecution by the Vatican before being vindicated. That combination of physical suffering, institutional loss, and spiritual grief sustained over half a century is about as complete an expression of Ardra's teardrop as it is possible to find in a single life. And what Padre Pio made from that suffering a ministry of compassion, healing, and spiritual guidance that drew millions of people is the redemptive transformation the text describes. His tears were the moisture that made others' growth possible. The career and places associated with Ardra are unusual compared to most nakshatras and worth noting honestly. On the shadow side, those who deal in dead or processed things like canned food, junk food, frozen food, or even butchers. Those experts at misrepresentation and double talk, like liars, cheats, rogues, and thieves. On the transformative side, atomic researchers and those who work with primal energies, chemotherapists, and makers of chemical formulas intended to destroy virus, bacteria, and disease. Those who actively work with destruction in service of healing and renewal. The common thread on the positive side is the deliberate use of destructive force in service of something larger, like the surgeon who cuts to heal, the chemist who destroys a pathogen to save a life, the researcher who splits the atom to understand the foundations of matter. These are Ardra's higher expressions, people who work at the edge of destruction with a purpose beyond the destruction itself. To summarize what we have covered today, Ardra is the sixth nakshatra occupying the middle degrees of Gemini. Its name means wet or moist. Its symbol is a teardrop. Its deity is Rudra, the storm god who weeps and howls, who destroys and dissolves. Its two core themes are grief, loss, and emotional intensity, and destruction and dissolution as necessary transformation. What the examples today show is that Ardra does not produce comfortable lives. Einstein carried the grief of what his work had unleashed. The Dalai Lama has carried the loss of his homeland for more than 60 years. Spielberg has spent his career inside the darkest chapters of human history. Roosevelt was stripped of his physical power and rebuilt himself from that loss. Rodin destroyed to reveal, and Padre Pio suffered for 50 years and turned his suffering into a gift. None of these are easy stories, but the classical text is direct about what Ardra offers those who endure it: the pride and satisfaction of conscious worth, a knowledge of how much it costs to accomplish one's growth. Rudra removes what has outlived its usefulness. The tears are moisture, and the storm, when it passes, leaves behind a cleared and fecund ground.